Welcome back, everybody, to EDIT 640. It's Joe again, here to present this week's module on shot composition. In this lesson, we'll examine a variety of different shot types that producers have to consider when they're planning instructional productions. We'll also look at specific camera motion techniques, because, after all, nobody wants to look at still cuts the entire time. We'll spend a lot of time focusing on framing techniques, how you actually fill a camera's frame with content. And of course, the 180-degree rule will teach us why camera operators should never, ever cross the line of action when shooting. And we'll explain what that means shortly. And finally, we'll demystify image resolutions so we can figure out what the heck HD really means anyway. So let's take a look at some shot types that instructional video producers tend to use. There are quite a few, and many that are not even presented here, but we're just going to focus on the ones that you tend to see in instructional productions, such as extreme close-ups, medium shots, long shots, sometimes they're called full shots, and then extreme shots, extremely long shots, and a lot of times they're simply called wide shots. And we'll make sense of all of these. Here's a cutout that might give you some idea of what we're looking at. You can see how extreme close-ups focus more on the face, and then the wide shot gets pretty much everything in the background. But it's easier to understand this if we take these one at a time. So let's take a look at this image here. We all know who this is, of course, I hope. This is Steve Jobs, one of the last presentations he gave before he passed. But let's take a look at how an extreme close-up shot might be framed. If the camera is positioned right there on the floor on a tripod looking up, an extreme close-up shot would cover a real tight shot of his face. Not the entire face, and that's really important to understand. Most extreme close-ups tend to focus on the eyes down to the chin, but rarely do you have the whole head in there. When you get the whole head, typically that's called a close-up shot. And extreme close-ups are more often used to convey some type of emotion, especially surprise. We don't use them quite often in instructional productions, but you need to know about that type of shot anyway. Close-ups are a little bit more common, and we'll look at some examples of this, but I just want you to see how it's framed here. You're looking at basically the neck up, maybe a little bit of the shoulders, and definitely get the entire head in that shot. Medium shots are probably the most common in instructional productions. They tend to start the frame right about the belt line from the hips on up above the head, and we'll talk about headroom later. Long shots capture the entire subject, whether that subject is a human or something else. The entire subject is in frame, top to bottom. And of course, if we were going to take an extreme long shot of this particular scene, the camera would have to change places. It would have to go all the way to the back of the auditorium and get some of the audience in the front of the shot as well to provide some context. And again, we'll look at some examples of this. Let's start back again with extreme close-up. We see this a lot in entertainment productions, Hollywood productions of humans. A lot of times they're combined with an angle. In this case, you've got the camera on a high angle looking down at the actor looking up. And there's a lot of emotion that can be conveyed in those types of shots. But you're not limited to humans, certainly, in extreme close-up shots. Certainly animals can be captured using an extreme close-up shot as well. Just keep in mind that you're not getting the whole head. It's usually just parts of the head. And of course, it doesn't have to be a head at all. It doesn't have to be anything alive. It can certainly be inorganic. And we see this a lot with product shots and with demonstration shots, especially those that are very tedious or meticulous in nature. You might have the camera very close to the subject and really stress out the focal lens on your camera, especially if you're using your smartphone and trying to use the automated focus function. Sometimes at extremely close levels it cannot resolve from such a close distance, and so you have to slowly back the camera up to find the right spot. Nevertheless, we do see some use of extreme close-ups in instructional videos. More often we'll see close-up shots, of course, and there is some degree of personal space that we need to discuss here with close-up shots. When you're shooting a host or some kind of on-camera talent, a close-up is considered a very intimate shot, and so we wouldn't normally use this if this were the instructor while she's teaching. We might use a shot like this at the very beginning as an intro sequence where we get to see her up close and personal, and then the other shots will be a little bit farther away. There is this unspoken professional distance that we tend to keep in instructional videos. And that's why medium shots are used more often than not. Nevertheless, you can certainly use a close-up shot. Just don't use it as the primary shot for most of your instructional sequences. And of course, close-ups are extremely useful in instructional productions when you're trying to demonstrate something. In this case, we've got obviously a tight shot on the hands that are cutting this carrot. Would obviously be part of a cooking show, but it could be any type of mechanical or kinesthetic type of demonstration. Close-ups are very, very useful for cutaway footage. You have a shot of the head, a talking head, and then we go straight to some type of close-up cutaway. Very, very common technique. Medium shots, probably the most common we see in instructional presentations, just like we said before. And of course, one of the icons of instructional videography, even though we don't think of it, we learn something probably every time we're on the videography. And one of the things we've learned is that if Jim Cantore shows up in your neighborhood, you better batten down the hatches because bad things are coming. And you can see here in this classic shot from the New Jersey hurricane how the framing starts at about just above what would be belt level and then raises up to a little bit over his head. And these other shots up here, again, this is our tribute to Jim Cantore, I guess. I simply want you to notice how what people define as medium sometimes can be varied. For example, in this shot up here in the top right-hand side, you can see some people would get bent out of shape and call this actually a medium-long shot. Others would simply call it medium shot. So just know that anywhere from the belt line down to about the knees is pretty safe area to shoot. It just depends on what exactly it is you're trying to capture. Inside set design shots, in this case, you got a table blocking their hips, but again, it's still considered a medium shot. For long shots, we tend to use long shots to capture the entire subject, and that subject's usually in full frame doing something. For example, here we've got Oprah and Whitney, and we can see from top to bottom their shoes up to their head while the interview is taking place. In this shot here, we've got some workers unloading some material from the back of this truck. You'll notice that the truck here actually takes up more space than the subjects do. In this case, obviously, that we're dealing with a home renovation show. You've got a truck very conveniently placed. This may be simple marketing product placement agreements here between the production company and GM. I don't know, but it certainly seems that way. Nevertheless, the point is, in a long shot, you get to see everything in action. So these guys are unloading, and you get to see most of the truck as well. In this skiing shot here, we can see the actors coming down. It's hard to call them actors, I know, but coming down the slopes there, doing their thing. They're in the context of their activity. In this, I guess this could be some type of nature documentary here on orcas. We see most of him swimming out of the water. And I want to point something out interesting about this shot, because if you can imagine that this shot did not have the whale in it, if we took out this killer whale so that there's just the background image, we would then actually be able to call it an extreme long shot or a wide shot, because we tend to see those for panoramics and large-scale scenes. Nevertheless, let's look at some more examples then of the extreme long shots. Very typical, the point of an extreme long shot or a wide shot is to establish context. And that context can typically refer to place, it can refer to time, it can refer to action, or it can even designate the subject. In this particular shot here of this house, obviously that's designating place, as is the Eiffel Tower here, obviously designating that this is Paris, France. And then we have a shot of this generic road here. That could indicate many things. It could indicate that we're on some type of travel show. It could indicate that time is passing. In fact, in many cases, we see this as kind of an iconic shot here where you have a first-person perspective of the road, and then the camera captures the video, but it's edited to fast forward as if to indicate that we are traveling somewhere, and this also saves time between different segments. And we'll talk a lot more about fast forward and other special effects later. And of course, an extreme long shot can also be used to establish a subject. If this were an instructional video about storm clouds or other significant weather events, this would be a great shot. Let me show you a video here. It's very short, and I want you to watch this video as it demonstrates all of these types of shots that we've just studied. And I want to point out that this video is very similar to what I want you to do homework. In other words, this video models actually the type of homework project that you're going to submit for this particular module. Here's what I mean. It's very short. Wasn't that cool? Let me replay that real quickly and make a few comments about that. In addition to just being a montage of shot types, it does a lot more than that. There's actually a story that's being told here. And I hope you picked up on that. So as we go through these, notice that every shot has a text title on it that tells us what kind of shot it is. I want you to notice that there's actually a story here. The guy's walking in the park and suddenly some stranger walks up to him. We've got dogs running around in the background. What's he doing? What's he thinking? Etc. He's late for something. Looks like he's waiting. And then all of a sudden a stranger walks up and gives him a sheet of paper. As silly as this sounds, this is in a very small way, storytelling. And I want you to give it your best shot. Even though this is an instructional video production class, for your homework assignment, if you want to create something that's more narrative than it is instructional, that's fine. But I want you to do something very similar to what you see here. I want you to shoot a bunch of different shot types, and they're explained in the homework assignment, and then stitch them together in a way perhaps that tells some kind of story. Make sure you put your titles on there so we know which kind of shot you're trying to demonstrate for us. But really put some planning into this, and in many ways this is a good exercise for our upcoming modules on storyboarding and planning for production. Because if you do this right, if you think about a context or a very small storyline that you might want to experiment with this, then you can start thinking about the kinds of shots that you want to create. And my goal in this homework assignment is to get you to do more than just recognize shot types, but actually start thinking about when one shot type is more appropriate than another for the kind of message, or in this case, story that you're trying to tell. So give it your best shot. I consider this Video Maker video very, very good. And I would love to see everybody in here produce something of this quality. It doesn't take a fancy camera, and notice that there's no audio other than a soundtrack. And I'll make you a deal. If you wanted to make it completely silent, you could. But if you want to import an MP3 and have that as your soundtrack underneath so that you can build this kind of mood that you're looking for in your production, then try it. But anyway, the details for this assignment are explained in the homework blog, so make sure you take a good look at that and have fun with this, because it's a great way to learn how to use these different shot types. Okay, let's talk about motion. Now, in the previous example, in that video example that we just looked at, the camera was still most of the time. But I want you to understand that when your action is not terribly engaging, as it was in that video, there wasn't a whole lot of dynamic activity other than the dogs playing in the background. It was mostly a single person standing around until the very end. It wasn't until the very end that we got a little bit more action. So I want you to understand how your camera can create action simply by using shot types that involve motion. And so in this next video, I want you to watch very carefully. It's very short, just 5 minutes. I want you to take a look at how they use still shots, pan shots, tilt shots, zoom, dolly, truck, something called sled and vest, which is probably a little bit more elaborate than anything we can do, but it's good for you to know how Hollywood solves some of these shot type problems. And then boom cams. And you can definitely fabricate a homemade boom for your shots, so I will leave that to your creativity. But let's take a look at this video here. They do a very good job. Again, this is from Videomaker, the same people that do our textbook.
Camera movement is one of the most expressive tools for a director to use. Good camera movement can enhance the emotion of a scene, reveal elements that are off-screen, and can help the viewer feel like part of the action. Since it is such a powerful tool, it is very important to know the types of camera movements available, as well as the proper time to use them. By far, the most common type of camera movement is a simple pan or tilt. Panning a camera refers to rotating a camera on an axis or tripod horizontally, while tilting refers to moving a camera in the same way, only vertically. Both are used to follow the movement in a scene, but can also be used to reveal elements that were not originally in frame. This can help build a feeling of surprise or advance the story of a film. A great example of this can be found in the movie Braveheart, when William Wallace runs around the corner of his house. As he does so, the camera pans to the right to reveal an envoy of people who have come to announce the death of William's father. This helps the audience feel the same shock and surprise as William feels when he realizes what the envoy means. One of the best ways to make a narrative look more professional is to incorporate dolly and truck movements into a scene. A dolly movement is made by moving a camera either closer or further from the subject over time. The movie Tombstone uses a dolly shot in order to see expression on the face of a main character during an important piece of dialogue in the movie. Another move closely related to the dolly is the truck. This shot is performed by moving a camera from side to side. Movies such as The Dark Knight use this camera move to set the pace of a scene. The slow dolly movement in this scene is in stark contrast to the action that just happened in the movie. This allows the audience to know that the pace has become more relaxed in this scene. Other movies such as Saving Private Ryan use this movement to follow characters as they move away from the camera and to reveal elements in the foreground that help you gain insight into the story. Dolly moves are most often performed using either a wheel dolly, a track dolly, or a sliding dolly, depending on the size of the set and the amount of equipment being used. Wheeled and track dollies are great for heavy camera equipment, which operators can sit or stand next to, while slider dollies are great for smaller cameras and shorter moves. Also, tabletop dollies are useful for getting smooth shots from low to the ground or product shots that are placed on a smooth surface. If you don't have access to a camera dolly, great shots can also be achieved using common items such as wheelchairs and carts. For those camera moves where you don't want dolly tracks to be seen and where complex motion needs to occur, a sled and vest system is the best option. A sled and vest system usually consists of a weighted camera sled for counterbalance, an elastic arm that can absorb the shock of human movement, and lastly, a vest to distribute the equipment's weight evenly over an operator's body. This shot sequence shows the kind of unique movement a sled and vest system can achieve. In the film, the camera moves smoothly past each character, giving viewers a unique insight into what each character is thinking or feeling before the tense battle is about to begin. Even so, a camera and vest system can't eliminate all the shake of human movement. As a result, most operators bend their knees slightly and walk carefully from heel to toe to dampen the vibration from their footsteps. Another popular camera move is the boom. A boom is a device consisting of a camera that is attached to an arm that can pivot on a fixed point through space. This movement is useful for many of the same reasons as a tilt or pan like this clip from The Dark Knight shows. The boom allows for both low and high angle shots. A boom movement is useful for many other purposes too. For example, in the movie The Shawshank Redemption, a boom movement is used to represent the newfound freedom of the main character who had escaped from having been in jail for many years. Boom arms often require additional setup time, as many pieces need to be joined together for it to work, including weights at the opposite end of the boom arm to balance the camera. As a result, shots utilizing a boom arm need to be planned in advance to make sure there's plenty of time and access to set up the equipment. Clever camera movement is one of the best ways to add drama and information to a scene. That's why knowing how and when to use dollies, boom arms, sled and vest systems, and tripods in your story can give your production an engaging and emotional boost.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop it right there. I think you get the point. Now, don't freak out because the second part of this video was emphasizing all of this expensive equipment. Obviously, none of us are going to have Hollywood-class trucks and dollies and sleds and vest systems or booms, etc. But I want to point out here that with duct tape and a variety of household items, you can improvise substantially using your cameras to create or simulate what Hollywood does. For example, using a traditional broom and duct taping a camera to the top of it allows you to get shots that you might not ordinarily get. You can also use shopping carts and put a pillow on it, and then put your camera on top of the pillow so it doesn't absorb the vibrations. And if you're rolling it across a surface that isn't too loud, or if you're just rolling it very quietly, you can get some very, very good shots that way. So anyway, think creatively as you go about the planning process for some of your future assignments. I think you'll be able to come up with some innovative and unique ways, and you'll be asked to explain those in the narrative part of your homework submissions. So for the time being, just understand that the camera can create a sense of motion by using these particular shot types. So keep these in mind, and I look forward to seeing evidence of your creativity later. Okay, let's switch over and talk about framing. We'll take a look at the rule of thirds, how we can use angles to create different types of effects, and then we'll talk about the concept of headroom. Framing is the art of placing the subject inside the frame, and the mark of a beginner is to center everything. So don't be an amateur here. Don't center every single one of your shots. By the end of this course, you will not only be a good video producer, you'll also be a good photographer as well. And anybody who's taken a photography class can tell you about the rule of thirds. The reason we don't want to center everything is that it confuses the eye. When I look at this image here, I'm not quite sure where to focus. Now that may strike you as kind of strange because he's talking on screen here, but here's the logic. We have a symmetric amount of space on the left side as we have on the right side. So as we look at this, my eye bounces back and forth, left to right, left to right, left to right, eventually settling right on the center. That's very different from shots that have the subject in one side or the other. And I'll show you why this works according to the rule of thirds. Here's the grid. Now the good news is they've got the eyes at the right level. The eyes are right here along this upper horizontal axis, which is where it should be. We'll talk about headroom here in just a second. But centering him here in the middle channel, in the middle column here, is not what we're trying to do. We really want to center him on this axis, the right axis or the left axis. So you want the takeaway from all this is avoid centering your subjects and put them in either third, the right hand or the left hand. Let's take a shot of Anderson Cooper here. And you can see how the videographer here framed him following the rule of thirds perfectly. Notice also that we have a real cool depth of field effect here. This manual focus right on Anderson right here, so we don't see what's going on there. And if we were to play this shot live, what you would see is that after he stops talking, the camera focuses on what these guys are doing. And that's a very, very common technique, is to change your focus. Now, some of your cameras don't have that capability. At least not right out of the box without getting special apps or practicing significantly. But keep this in mind, that's a very common technique. Notice that centering subjects doesn't just apply to humans as well. If you have an inorganic subject, in this case volcanoes, we don't want to center those. It's considered a breach of the rule of thirds by centering everything, and this applies to non-human subjects as well. So instead of placing it in the center, it might look better if it were centered on the left or right-hand third axis right here. Now in this shot, we have some extra content up here, but the primary focal point here is this mountain in the background with a volcano on top of it. And the effect is, it makes it very clear which side of the frame is heavier, and it immediately draws the eye toward that. When you have multi-subject shots, don't put everybody in the middle. Group a couple of your subjects on one side and leave another. If it's a 3-shot, leave the other one on the other side. You can see here on the Springer show how the cameraman did exactly that. You've got 2 subjects over here around the right-hand third axis, and then Jerry's over here pretty far to the side. If the cameraman had shifted over to the left a little bit more, they would have all appeared to have been crammed near this axis and centered on there symmetrically. And again, the whole trick here is to deliberately keep your shots unbalanced, because if you tilt the frame, not tilting the camera, but if you make one side of the frame heavier than the other, it pulls the eye along with it. It makes it very clear what the subject of that particular shot is. Let's talk about angles, and this relates to the rule of thirds, what we're talking about here in just a second. Let's look at this interview shot here. Pretty typical over-the-shoulder shot in a conversation. The camera's behind the right-hand shoulder of this person, and he's asking a question, and the actress here is listening and getting ready to speak. And what I want to point out here is not so much that it's framed very well, where each subject is near one of the axes in the rule, according to the rule of thirds. What I want to show you here is something a lot more subtle. Do you see this angle here connecting their 2 heads? The camera is closest to this guy right here, so he appears bigger and fills more of the frame than this actress, who appears farther away and smaller. This creates a tilting effect. This angle is deliberate here, and what it does, it points to the primary subject. So even though she's facing us, the angle here reinforces the eye to move toward her naturally. And this is really important when you have dialogue going back and forth quickly. Here's another example, same type of scenario. You have the rule of thirds that's honored pretty well there. And then there's your angled line. Again, it's tilting everything this way. And I probably shouldn't use the word tilt. Let's use the word angle. Again, the whole point is to pull the eye toward your principal actor or actress or subject. In this case, she's saying something, and our eyes naturally fall that way. Now, angles can also refer to where the camera is positioned, not just where your subjects are positioned, but where the camera is. In both of these shots, the camera is very low. You can see in this shot of the building ruins here how it creates this sense of power or intimidation. You definitely feel that looking at this bull elephant. It makes you wonder if the videographer got trampled here after this shot was taken. But this is all deliberate. It makes the subjects look more authoritative. Contrast that with high angle shots like what we have over here. High angle shots tend to be more intimate, or they're used to provide detail like you see in the upper shot there in this machine shop. Or they provide context, in this case this shot of the Golden Gate Bridge. Other common angles that we see in instructional productions include bird's eye view. In this case, this is very common actually. You pull a shot from Google Maps, or you generate an animation using Google Earth, which you can then record using any screen capture utility. Very cool trick. We'll look at that later in the course. But having a bird's eye view here is very common for for describing a setting or situating the viewer so they know exactly where you are. Point of view, obviously a little bit more intimate here, showing the actor or the principal subject's point of view as they are engaged in some kind of activity. And then we have Dutch angles. Dutch angles are deliberately tilted. They're off-center, and they're done with a specific impact in mind. They're trying to create some type of sense of tension or suspense. And so we don't tend to see them that often in instructional productions, but it's very common in Hollywood anytime you're in a scene where something significant is about to happen, and there's suspense, a sense of suspense or tension that's building up. So look for Dutch angles the next time you rent a movie or watch something online. Let's talk about headroom. This is probably one of the most obvious marks of an amateur. Taking a photo or shooting video with too much headspace. We have two actresses here engaged in some kind of dialogue with way too much headspace above them in the framing. In this one, the next one, there's too little. The cameraman moved forward or zoomed in and filled the frame, but it's too much. If we're cutting their hair off, that's too much for a medium shot. What's the right amount? Well, the right amount puts just enough headspace above them so that the two of them would be framed within the rule of thirds top horizontal axis, just like that. That's what we're trying to shoot for. So as you frame your subjects, whether it's a human subject or a non-human subject or a setting, keep the rule of thirds in mind here and try to put the most important part in the top third. For humans engaged in dialogue, or for actors engaged in dialogue, put their eyes on that top third horizontal axis, and all will be well with the universe. Let's take a look at a few advanced framing concepts, and these again come from the Videomaker website, but this is a short, real good video here that will introduce you to some of the advanced concepts called leading lines, rack focus, lead room, and then natural framing, and then shot balance. So let's take a look.
Behind every great shot is a great composition. Without a pleasing composition, shots tend to look amateur and lifeless. So even if you're not planning to be the next Ansel Adams, it's still a good idea to know important concepts like leading lines, rack focusing, lead room, natural framing, and balance. By doing so, you can make sure that your shots stand out from the rest. One of the best ways to direct a viewer's eyes is through using leading lines. Leading lines are naturally occurring lines in a shot that point towards the subject. Leading lines can be either horizontal, vertical, diagonal, or curved. Horizontal lines like those found in Forrest Gump when Forrest finally stops running after years on the road can show serenity and inactivity. On the other hand, vertical lines like those used in Dark Knight can show strength and dignity. However, since the subject is so small in the scene, the tall vertical lines quickly become threatening. At the same time, diagonal lines can show action, imbalance, and insecurity, as seen in this example from Snatch, when a man is in real fear for his life. In this example from Forrest Gump, the diagonal lines make a connection between Forrest Gump and Washington, D.C., which is represented by the Washington Monument. Another very effective way of directing the focus of the viewer is by using a rack focus. A rack focus is a technique where one object in a scene starts in focus and gradually goes out of focus until another object in the shot is in focus instead. This example from X-Men Origins, Wolverine, shows an effective use of a rack focus. In this scene, a boy is trying to hide a knife from his father. In order to make the audience aware of his knife, the scene starts in focus on the knife, and then it transitions to being in focus on the father, showing that he is unaware of the object in the boy's hands. An important purpose of a rack focus is to show the relationship of one item in a scene to the other item in the scene that comes into focus. In the same movie, a rare metal is found by a general, which becomes the area of focus. To show how the metal relates to the people they are taking it from, the camera refocuses on their tribe. This rack focus helped connect the two events happening in the film. Giving a subject lead room in your video is yet another way to keep your audience pleased with your shots. Lead room refers to the cushion of space in the frame that is needed for objects that are in action. That being said, if you're already utilizing the rule of thirds in your framing, having proper lead room won't be an issue. This is because if you've already used the rule to place your subject in the right third of the frame and then walk left, you will have at least 2/3 of your frame left for lead room. This gives you plenty of real estate for errors and panning, as well as helping the subject to not look like they're about to run off the edge of the frame. Even in interviews, giving subjects plenty of room can help the viewer feel at ease. One of the most clever ways to direct your viewer's eyes is to use natural framing in your production. Objects such as trees, like in this shot from Braveheart, can help frame your subject and draw interest to its areas on the screen. Doorways and windows can also be used to naturally frame a subject. In this scene from Smoking Aces, both men are naturally framed inside the mirrored circles that are on the wall behind them. This draws attention to them and makes them feel more separate at the same time. All of these methods are great for framing your subject, but with some creativity, any number of objects can be used. Lastly, balance can be used to help your audience feel at ease about a shot. Balance refers to the difference between the amount of objects on one side of the frame compared to the other. If you have a lot of items on one side of the screen, like the scuba diver in the Life Aquatic, without anything to balance the weight on the other side, tension can be introduced. On the other hand, if, like this scene from Little Miss Sunshine, you keep the objects on both sides of the screen balanced, you can give your video not only a formal appearance, but also put your audience at ease. Composition isn't merely a technical term. It's a concept that needs to be closely entwined in every clip that you shoot. Understanding how to artistically place elements in a frame, using leading lines, rack focusing, lead room, natural framing, and balance can help you to effectively direct an audience to the area that you want them to see.
Okay, let me go ahead and stop that there. So keep these in mind. Now I know that rack focus is in particular a technique that not many of us will be able to do depending on the kind of cameras that we have, but some of you will be able to experiment with this, especially if you have an SLR camera which has manual focus on it. So I would encourage you to explore the capabilities of your camera as you consider using some of these framing techniques. Now let's move on. Let's talk about the 180-degree rule. The rule simply says, don't cross the line. What in the world does that mean? Well, let me show you what I mean. Let's pretend we're trying to shoot a conversation here between two different subjects. They're facing each other and they're engaged in some kind of dialogue. The 180-degree rule says that there's a line of action that goes right between them. And this line of action separates the actors from the camera, and more importantly, the camera should never ever be placed across the line. In other words, there are three different, let's say we have three cams here. We can shoot it over the shoulder of this actor, we can shoot it over the shoulder of this actor, and then we can have another shot here of them both in the same scene called a two-shot. Now keep in mind, even though there are three cameras here, you could simply shoot this same scene three different times from three different positions and then stitch this together to create the illusion that you're cutting between these three cameras live. But the point of the rule is you never ever want to put your camera over here on this side if you started on this side. Let me show you what I mean here, and this will be very clear. Let's color code this, okay? Okay, now don't laugh. But here is our blonde actress, here is our brunette actress. The blonde is going to have the fuchsia colored shirt and the brunette's going to have the pink colored shirt. In our first shot here, notice where the camera is. It's behind them, shooting over the right-hand shoulder. There's the right-hand shoulder. So we're shooting this way. So we're hearing her dialogue or watching her emotion, capturing her emotional response to whatever this person just said. In the next shot, this camera is capturing over the left-hand shoulder of our brunette in the pink shirt here. So it's shooting this way, capturing whatever her response is. And so when we put them together, when we stitch them together in Final Cut, there's the first conversation and there's the second conversation. Notice how they change sides. She's on the right-hand side here, and then we go to the left-hand side. So the next time you see a dialogue shot, watch the juxtaposition between the different shots. You should see both actors and actresses change sides. In other words, one actress is on this side while the other actress is on the opposite side. You never ever repeat them, because if this shot of her, if our fuchsia colored actress right here ended up being in the left hand side, we would have a severe continuity issue. It wouldn't make any sense. It would look like she's trying to talk to herself. So keep the 180-degree rule in mind anytime you're filming any kind of action that has multi-cameras or single cam shot several times, especially in dialogue shots where you're using those over-the-shoulder type of techniques. And again, notice the framing. We're using the rule of thirds here to get everybody framed correctly. but make sure you never ever cross that line of action. Keep your cameras on the same side and you'll be just fine. Let's talk about resolution. This is a very complex concept, and I'm going to water it down here enough so that we have a general understanding of what we're talking about. With photography and videography, resolution is simply a measurement. It's a measure of the number of units in width by the number of units in height. And some of the common resolutions that we deal with in videography include 4:3 and 16:9. Let me give you a little bit of history here. It's called aspect ratio. That's the technical term here. This ratio refers to the aspect of the actual image. And then there's a corresponding resolution, a pixel count that goes along with it. I'll explain. Take a look at these older devices. We remember this, right? These are the old tube TVs. You remember those. Well, in the old days, these tube TVs used a standardized National Television Standards Committee based 4:3 aspect ratio. And I'll give you some examples of those in just a second. They included 640x480 or 800x600 or eventually 1024x768. And the most important point I want to mention here is that they're 4:3. And you can see that really if you kind of trace each one of these, they look like slightly squarish rectangles. I know that's an oxymoron, but it's only 4 units wide by 3 units tall, so they tend to look more squarish than they do rectangular. And these default resolutions here, or standardized resolutions here, are very, very common. In fact, many computer monitors today are still sold with XGA as its base resolution or its standard resolution. But that's changing now, and it's changing because the world is going to 16:9. The 16:9 simply refers to having a wider screen. And we're seeing that in all of our consumer devices. We're seeing that in our computers. You see the widescreen here. We're certainly seeing it on our smartphones. And of course, our TVs now are much wider than they used to be. And broadcasting has changed accordingly. All of your cable HD packages will all be delivered in 16:9. Even YouTube now delivers its content in 16:9 aspect ratio. So it's something that we need to pay attention to. Here's where it gets confusing, unfortunately. How many different flavors of HD can there be? Good grief. Well, there are at least 3. 1280x720 is what most of you who have good smartphones are able to shoot. And that's an excellent resolution for instructional video, especially if it's intended to be broadcast over the web. That's a fantastic resolution. You're in good shape. Those of you who have SLR cameras or even advanced video cameras may be able to shoot what's called anamorphic HD or AHD, 1440x1080. And most of you at least know about full HD because you see the TVs or you have a TV that meets this description, and it too is at a 1920x1080 resolution, which is a 16:9 aspect ratio. And so you're probably scratching your head going, well, how can they all be high definition? Well, 720 was the earliest standard, and that's one of the reasons that it still keeps that. The real confusion comes in trying to understand the difference between the anamorphic HD and the full HD, because you can shoot anamorphic HD content with your camera and play it back on a full HD monitor, and it looks just like something captured at 1920x1080. And that makes no sense until we think about this. Pixel aspect ratio. In short, anamorphic HD doesn't use square pixels. Here's what I mean. Let's start with the basics. Okay, full HD. This is high quality television. It's not the highest anymore because now we can get 4K televisions if we want to spend $12,000 or $15,000 on it, but that price will be driven down eventually, as they always do. But let's talk about full HD here. This is what we see in most of the Best Buys when we walk into the TV section. Really nice 42 to 80 inch televisions now that can do 16:9 resolutions, and the most common resolution they do is 1920x1080 because that's what most of the content is. That's what your Blu-ray content is. That's what most of your HD programming on your cable and satellite packages is. So the world understands full HD, and full HD uses square pixels. And you can count them with me if you wanted to. There are 16 across by 9 high, and this is where that aspect ratio comes into play. Now the problem is if you have an anamorphic camera or a camera that shoots anamorphic HD, this is what it's going to look like. It's going to be 1440 by 1080. And if you do the math, you realize, hey, that's really 12 by 9. That ratio of 1440 by 1080 is not 16 by 9. It's really 12 by 9. And you can count them out, 12 across by 9 up. So how can this image here suddenly be transformed magically to match full HD? Well, the answer is it doesn't use square pixels. So it really isn't 12 by 9. The pixels are actually stretched. They're stretched horizontally so that this 1440 by 1080 captured image takes this same screen real estate as a full HD. And for those of you who have higher end cameras, in other words, something besides a smartphone, you may run into this problem. And so the key takeaway here is to make sure that in addition to shooting the highest 16 by 9 resolution quality your computer can stand, make sure you choose the right Premiere Elements preset, because the secret to making quality footage or to exporting quality footage is to matching the input source. So shoot your source in 16 by 9 and then match it to the appropriate Premiere Elements preset. If you've got an iPhone and you shot it in 1280 by 720 HD, then make sure that you choose the Premiere Elements 1280 by 720 preset for your when you start a new project. And do the same thing if you have a higher end camera as well. Some of you may have the 1440 by 1080, so I wanted to point that out because there is definitely a preset for that. And no matter what you do, make sure you export your video as 16 by 9 aspect ratio. And for most of us, 1280 by 720 will be absolutely entirely adequate. And truth be told, if you're exporting 1920 by 1080 full HD, it's probably going to bog your system down and it's going to make a much larger MP4 file. So my recommendation for all projects in this course going forward is 1280 by 720. So that concludes Module 3 on shot composition. Don't forget to check the main course site for information about our homework assignment. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.